Okay, so let's set a scene. Forget about spreadsheets and stock tickers for a minute. Picture this. It's December 2018. We're in Jaipur, India. You know, the pink city.
Right. It's vibrant. It's chaotic.
Exactly. And it's about as far as you can get, culturally and literally, from the cold, snowy streets of Halifax, Nova Scotia.
And inside a private hospital room in Jaipur, a 30-year-old Canadian CEO is dying. And this isn't just any tourist who got sick. This is Gerald Cotten,
The founder and CEO of QuadrigaCX, which at the time was believed to be Canada's largest cryptocurrency exchange.
And on his encrypted laptop, somewhere back in his hotel room, or maybe it's in the cloud, nobody's really sure at this point, are the keys. The only keys to 190 million US dollars.
Which is, what, 250 million Canadian dollars? $250 million?
Mm.
And as his heart stops, all of that money, it just, poof, it evaporates.
Well, that was the story, wasn't it? That was the initial narrative, the locked vault mystery. It was this perfect, almost mythical tech tragedy that the media just ate up in early 2019.
Right. A young crypto genius dies suddenly, tragically takes the only passwords to the grave, and 115,000 of his customers are just left stranded.
It was the ultimate not your keys, not your coins, cautionary tale, you know, a story about the dangers of the digital age. But, and this is the entire point of our Dick Dive today, that whole narrative was a carefully constructed lie.
It wasn't a case of lost keys. It was a case of an empty vault.
A crime scene. And when investigators, forensic accountants, the RCMP, when they finally pried open that digital vault, they didn't find a hoard of inaccessible Bitcoin. They found nothing.
A vacuum.
The vault wasn't locked. It had been empty for months. So today, we're unpacking the collapse of QuadrigaCX. We're going to look past the headlines and into the actual mechanics of what the Ontario Securities Commission later called an old-fashioned fraud wrapped in modern technology. And we have to profile the man at the center of it all, Gerald Cotten. Not as this, clumsy tech guy who forgot to write down his password, but as the sole architect of a massive Ponzi scheme he ran from his laptop, probably in his pajamas, from a suburb in Nova Scotia.
But we also need to explore the system, the Wild West environment of early crypto that let this happen in the first place. This is a story about fake identities, shadow banks, and a death that, to this very day, a lot of people are convinced was fake.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to really deconstruct this. How did one guy manage to fool the entire Canadian financial ecosystem? What were the red flags? And believe me, there were so many that everyone missed.
From his teenage years as a literal internet scammer to the convicted felon he chose as his co-founder.
And we want to get to the core question. Was Quadriga a legitimate business that just spiraled out of control when the market crashed? Or was it a fraud from the very first line of code?
All right, let's get into it. Part 1, the architect in the shadow. And you have to start with Gerald Cotten.
You have to.
If you go back and look at photos of him from, say, 2014, 2015, he has this look. He's the quintessential Canadian nice guy. He's got a soft, approachable face, a slightly ill-fitting suit. He doesn't look like a financial predator.
No, he looks like the guy who would help you with your homework. That was his greatest asset, his camouflage.
So on the surface, his background is completely clean. Born in 1988, grows up in Belleville, Ontario. He goes to a prestigious business school, Schulich at York University, graduates in 2010. I mean, on paper, he is the model of a respectable young entrepreneur.
But if you start digging into his digital archaeology, his early internet footprint, a totally different person emerges, a much, much darker persona.
We're talking about his teenage years, right?
Yeah.
Before he was ever Gerald Cotten CEO.
Exactly. While most kids his age were, I don't know, playing video games or worrying about high school, Cotten was deep in the swampy underbelly of online finance forums.
Specifically a forum called Talk Gold.
Talk Gold, yes. Which was, for anyone who doesn't know, a hub for something called high-yield investment programs, or HYIPs.
And high-yield investment program is just a polite way of saying Ponzi scheme, isn't it?
It is the politest possible euphemism for a Ponzi scheme. These were websites promising, absolutely insane returns, 10% a day, 100% a week. They'd claim they were trading gold or oil or using some secret arbitrage bot.
But really, they're just using new investors' money to pay off the early ones.
Until the whole thing collapses and the anonymous operator vanishes with the cash. And Cotten wasn't just some gullible kid who got tricked by these. He was a player. He was a promoter.
You had a handle, right? A screen name?
He did. He went by Scepter. And if you read Scepter's old posts, which internet sleuths later uncovered, you see this incredibly sharp, incredibly cynical operator. He's reviewing these schemes, he's promoting them, and he's almost certainly running a few of his own.
But there's a detail here that really stands out to me. It's not just that he was participating in the scams, he was selling the tools for other people to run scams.
Yes, that's such a key point. He ran a proxy service. Essentially, he sold software that allowed other operators to mask their IP addresses and hide their server locations.
Which is not something you need if you're running a legitimate business.
Not at all. But if you're running a Bitcoin doubler scam out of your mom's basement and you don't want the authorities knocking on your door, it's an essential piece of kit.
So long before Bitcoin even really exists in the mainstream, Cotten is learning the tradecraft. Anonymity, deception, how to build trust, and then betray it online.
He's building his fraud toolkit, and just as importantly, he's building his network. Because it was on these forums, Talk Gold and others like it, that he connected with the man who would become the shadow to his architect.
Michael Patryn.
Michael Patryn. Now, this guy is a whole other level. He's like a character who walked right out of a crime thriller.
So when Quadriga launches in Vancouver back in 2013, Patryn is the co-founder. But Michael Patryn is, well, it's a made-up name.
It's a recent invention. His birth name was Omar Dhanani.
And Omar Dhanani had a criminal record that would give any compliance officer a heart attack.
To put it mildly, yes. Back in the early 2000s in the U.S., Downey was part of an infamous hacking and identity theft ring called Shadow Crew. They were basically an online supermarket for stolen credit card numbers and fake IDs.
And he got caught, right?
Oh, yeah. The U.S. Secret Service busted the whole ring. Downey was arrested. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit identity theft and served 18 months in federal prison.
Identity theft, that's a very specific area of expertise.
It is, and it wasn't just that. He also had charges for burglary, grand theft. He was eventually deported back to Canada. And to try and, wipe the slate clean, he started changing his name. First to Omar Patryn in 2003, and then again to Michael Patryn in 2008.
Okay, so let's just pause and absorb this dynamic for a second.
All right.
You have Gerald Cotten, the clean-cut business school grad with a secret past as an online scammer.
Right.
And you have Michael Patryn, the convicted identity thief and ex-con. And these are the two guys who team up to start what is essentially an unregulated bank.
It was a perfect symbiotic relationship for a criminal enterprise. Patryn had the criminal record, the heat. He couldn't be the public face of the company because a 5-second Google search would pull up his mugshot.
But he knew the underworld.
He had the street smarts, and Cotten had the sterling reputation, the public face. He could put on a suit, he could go to the Bitcoin conferences, talk to journalists, smile, and seem completely plausible.
Cotten was the front man. Patryn was the architect in the shadows.
In the early days, absolutely. They founded QuadrigaCX in late 2013, and they made a big splash early on. They installed the second ever Bitcoin ATM in Canada in a coffee shop in Vancouver.
I remember that time, 2013, 2014. That was a huge deal. It made crypto feel real, tangible, not just some weird internet money.
And that's exactly what they were selling, an image of legitimacy, an image of infrastructure and stability. But even back then, if you were paying close attention, the cracks were already starting to show.
You're talking about that interview he did.
That 2014 interview, yeah. He's talking about security, and he casually mentions that they store all their customer funds on paper wallets in a safety deposit box at a bank.
Which, for anyone listening, is literally a piece of paper with the private keys printed on it.
Right. And for you or me holding a bit of crypto, that's actually a pretty secure method. But for a financial exchange handling millions of dollars in daily volume, it is absurdly, dangerously inefficient.
It's like a stock exchange saying they keep all their share certificates in a shoebox under the CEO's desk.
Exactly. And Cotten even said something like, we just send money to them. We don't need to go back to the bank every time, which implies this one-way flow. Money goes into the box, but getting it out is a slow, manual process. It was a huge red flag about their liquidity.
But this partnership didn't last forever. Patryn eventually leaves.
He does. By 2016, there's a major shift. Quadriga had tried to go public on the Canadian Securities Exchange, which would have meant opening their books for a real audit, and they failed. The deal fell through. They ran out of money. And right around that same time, all the other directors, including Michael Patryn, resigned.
Leaving Gerry Cotten as the sole director.
The sole director, the sole officer, the sole shareholder, the only person with the keys to the entire kingdom. From 2016 onward, QuadrigaCX was a one-man show.
Which brings us to part two, the operation. And really, it should be called the illusion because the entire company was a facade.
It was pure theater. If you logged onto their website, it looked professional. You saw, live price charts, trading volume, order books.
Yeah.
You pictured a bustling office, a server room, maybe a compliance department down the hall.
But the reality was just Gerald Cotten sitting on a couch in his house in Fall River, Nova Scotia, with an encrypted laptop.
That was it. There was no office. There were no real employees, just a handful of remote contractors who handled customer support. And the most damning part of all, there was absolutely no accounting system.
Wait, say that again. No accounting system.
Yeah.
You don't mean like they had bad accounting. You mean literally none.
Yeah.
No QuickBooks. Not even an Excel spreadsheet.
Nothing. Zero. When the court-appointed monitor, Ernst & Young, came in later, they were completely baffled. There were no corporate books, no general ledger, no record of profits and losses. He was running a $250 million financial institution like a kid's lemonade stand.
That's just terrifying. But their biggest operational problem wasn't even the accounting. It was the banking, right?
Yeah.
And this is such a critical piece of the puzzle.
It's central to the whole story. Because back then, the big Canadian banks, RBC, TD, Scotiabank, they hated crypto. They saw it as a massive risk for money laundering, and they just refused to deal with it.
So if you're an exchange like Quadriga, you can't just walk into a BMO and open a business checking account.
No, they'd shut you down in a week. Your accounts would be constantly frozen. So this creates a huge problem. How do you move millions of real Canadian dollars in and out of your exchange if no bank will touch you?
You have to find a workaround.
You have to go into the shadows. You end up using these third-party payment processors. And these are basically intermediary companies that act as a buffer between the crypto world and the traditional banking system.
But even the legitimate ones would have standards.
They do. So Cotten had to use the absolute bottom of the barrel, companies with names that sound fake, like WB21 and Crypto Capital.
And these weren't exactly reputable firms.
Not even close.
Yeah.
The CEO of WB21 was later sued by the SEC in the U.S. for a $165 million fraud. Crypto Capital was a Panamanian company that got linked to the massive Bitfinex hack and was accused of laundering hundreds of millions for South American drug cartels.
So these are the business partners Gerald Cotten chose. He was giving customer money to international criminals.
Because they were the only ones who would do business with him. And this reliance on shady, unreliable processors led to some truly bizarre real-world consequences for customers.
You're talking about the Laval incident. This story is just incredible.
It's like something out of a gangster movie. Because the electronic wires and bank transfers were constantly getting frozen or delayed, Quadriga came up with a solution. They set up a physical cash pickup point.
What?
A physical cash pickup. In an unmarked office in Laval, Quebec. If you wanted to withdraw, say, $20,000, customer support would literally tell you, go to this address at this time and a guy will have an envelope of cash for you.
That is unbelievable. Can you imagine your bank telling you to do that? Yeah, for your withdrawal, just meet a guy named Vinny behind the warehouse.
It's insane. And customers would drive for hours to get to this nondescript building, and sometimes they'd actually get their money. But just as often, they'd arrive to find an empty office or a confused receptionist who had never heard of Quadriga. The cash just wouldn't be there.
That's a 5-alarm fire of a red flag. It screams that the company is completely out of money. And yet, people kept depositing. Why?
2 words. The 2017 boom.
Ah, right. The mania.
We have to remember the psychology of that year. Bitcoin started 2017 at under $1,000 and ended it near $20,000. Everybody was a genius. Everybody was getting rich.
And greed makes you blind to risk.
Completely. The sheer volume of new money pouring in masked all the underlying problems. Quadriga processed something like 1.2 billion Canadian dollars in trades in 2017 alone. In a Ponzi scheme, as long as new money is coming in faster than old money is trying to get out, the illusion of solvency can be maintained.
But then came 2018, the crash.
The crypto winter. Bitcoin's price just fell off a cliff. It lost 80% of its value. And when the price crashes, what's the first thing everyone wants to do?
Get their money out. Sell. Get back to the safety of cash.
And suddenly, that flow of money completely reverses. Everyone wants out, and nobody new is coming in. The music stops.
And the whole house of cards starts to wobble.
It was in a death spiral for all of 2018. CIBC, one of the big banks, froze $28 million of their funds because they looked at the account and couldn't figure out who the money actually belonged to Quadriga or its customers.
And the withdrawal delays went from weeks to months?
The Reddit forums were on fire. Is Quadriga insolvent? Has anyone gotten their money? It was chaos. Cotten was juggling lawsuits, frozen bank accounts, and an online mob of furious customers.
So he's completely cornered. The walls are closing in. And in the middle of this total five-alarm catastrophe, he decides to book a trip to India.
Ostensibly for a honeymoon and to help open an orphanage.
Which brings us to part 3, the crash and the death.
Yeah.
And this is the timeline that has launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. The details here are just so important.
They really are. So Cotten and his new wife, Jennifer Robertson, they travel to Jaipur. They check into the Oberoi Raj Villas, which is this incredibly luxurious 5-star resort.
Okay. On December 8th, 2018, Cotten complains of severe stomach pain and is admitted to a private hospital.
The Fortis Escorts Hospital. The initial diagnosis is septic shock, peritonitis, intestinal obstruction. Now, we should say Cotten did have a documented history of Crohn's disease.
Which is a serious inflammatory bowel disease, but it's not usually a death sentence for a 30-year-old, is it?
No, it's typically manageable. It's rarely fatal, especially for a young man with access to top-tier private medical care, unless it's an extremely acute complication that's been left untreated.
The speed of what happened next is just shocking. He's admitted on the 8th.
And he's dead on the 9th, less than 24 hours later. The official cause of death is listed as cardiac arrest resulting from the complications.
A death certificate is issued almost immediately on December 10th. The local police provide a no-objection certificate, which is needed to transport a body, and he's embalmed and flown back to Nova Scotia for a funeral just a few days later.
It all happened incredibly fast. Now, if you just look at that in a vacuum, it's a terrible tragedy. A young man dies from a sudden medical complication while traveling.
But you can't look at it in a vacuum. You have to look at what he did just before he left for that trip. 12 days before, to be exact.
November 27th, 2018. Less than 2 weeks before he boards that flight to India, Gerald Cotten sits down with a lawyer and signs his last will and testament.
And this wasn't some simple, I leave everything to my wife document. This is a very specific, very detailed plan for the disbursement of his estate.
His $9.6 million personal estate, yeah. Everything went to his wife, Jennifer Robertson. The mansion in Fall River, another property out in Kelowna, BC, a 2017 Lexus, a sailboat, even an airplane. He owned a Cessna.
And the dogs. We cannot forget the dogs.
No, you can't. He specifically set up a $100,000 trust fund for the lifelong care of his 2 pet chihuahuas.
So let me get this straight. He takes the time to legally secure the financial future of his dogs.
Right.
But the will contains absolutely no mention of the business. Nothing about the crypto keys, the passwords, or the $250 million belonging to his 115,000 customers.
Not a word. It looks less like responsible estate planning and more like an exit strategy. It's a man meticulously securing his personal assets before something happens.
Okay, so he dies on December 9th. But here's the part that is just indefensible from a business perspective. QuadrigaCX, the company, says nothing.
Total silence. For over a month, they don't announce his death.
And worse, they keep accepting deposits.
They keep taking people's money. All through December and into January, new customers are sending money to an exchange whose CEO is dead and whose assets are supposedly locked forever. It's criminal.
The public announcement doesn't come until January 14th, 2019. This very sober post on their website. It is with a heavy heart that we announce the sudden passing of our founder, and that's when the crypto world just exploded.
The site immediately went down for maintenance, and then on January 31st, the company officially filed for creditor protection. And this is the moment the Lost Keys narrative is born.
Jennifer Robertson, his widow, files this sworn affidavit, and it basically says, Jerry ran everything from his encrypted laptop. I don't know the password. Nobody knows the password. All the money is trapped in secure, cold storage wallets, and we can't get to it.
And the media, as we said, they just ran with it. It was a perfect, simple, tragic story, the absent-minded genius and his lost digital treasure.
But then the professionals got involved.
Then came Ernst & Young. The court appointed them as the monitor, the official investigator, and their job was simple. Find the money. Crack the laptop, find a backup key, search the safety deposit boxes, whatever it takes.
And this leads us to part 4, the unraveling. Because what Ernst & Young found on the blockchain didn't just poke holes in the Lost Keys story. It blew it to smithereens.
So EY, with the help of blockchain forensic experts, they managed to identify the 6 main cold wallet addresses that Quadriga supposedly used to store the vast majority of customer funds.
These are the digital vaults, where that $190 million was supposed to be safely sitting.
That was the claim. So they look up these addresses on the public blockchain ledger, and the moment they look inside,
No.
zero. Empty. They were completely empty.
Not locked.
Yeah.
Not inaccessible. Just empty.
And here is the absolute kill shot to the official story. Forensic analysis showed that those wallets had been systematically emptied out and had been sitting empty since April of 2018.
April 2018. That's 8 months before Gerald Cotten died in India.
Exactly. So even if he had walked out of that hospital completely healthy, even if he had given them the password on a silver platter, it wouldn't have mattered. The money was already gone.
The death didn't cause the loss. The death was the event that revealed a loss that had already happened.
Precisely. The death became the cover story for the theft.
There was this one moment during the investigation that is just so darkly comical, it perfectly sums up the chaos and incompetence. The inadvertent transfer.
Ugh, this is just painful to even talk about. So while EY is conducting its investigation, some of the remaining Quadriga contractors are trying to be helpful, trying to consolidate the few remaining funds they can find.
Okay.
And in the process, they accidentally trigger some old automated script that Cotten had set up. And they inadvertently transfer another 103 Bitcoin worth, about $500,000 Canadian dollars at the time, into one of those now infamous, inaccessible cold wallets.
You're kidding me. They threw another $500,000 into the black hole they were investigating.
Yes. They basically compounded the loss live, in real time. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion inside another car crash. It just proved that nobody but Cotten had any idea how this rickety machine was actually put together.
So the big question then is obvious. The wallets are empty. Where did all the money go? Did he stash it somewhere? Is it buried in the Cayman Islands?
And that question takes us to part 5, the verdict. Because the Ontario Securities Commission, the OSC, conducted its own massive investigation. They released their final report in June 2020, and it left no room for ambiguity.
And they had that great line, an old-fashioned fraud wrapped in modern technology.
A perfect summary, because here's how the fraud actually worked. And this is where you can see the DNA of Scepter, his teenage scammer persona, all over it.
So what did he do?
First, Cotten created a series of fake accounts on his own Quadriga platform. He gave them aliases like Chris Marquet or Ari2D2 or Cethos.
So these were basically ghost accounts that he controlled.
Exactly. Then he would just go into the back-end database of the exchange and credit these accounts with millions of dollars of fictitious Canadian currency. He would just take 1 million into the balance field.
He was literally printing his own money. Counterfeiting.
He was printing Quadriga bucks. They weren't backed by anything. Then, and this is the genius of the scam, he would take those fake Quadriga bucks and use them to buy real cryptocurrency from his own unsuspecting customers on the platform.
Oh, wow. So if I'm a regular user and I sell 1 Bitcoin, I think I'm trading with another real person and I get, say, 10,000 real Canadian dollars in my account.
But you're not. You're trading with Jerry's fake alias, and the $10,000 that appears in your account balance is just a number he typed into a database.
Right.
But he now has your real Bitcoin.
And what did he do with all that real crypto he was siphoning off?
He transferred it off Quadriga immediately. He moved it to personal accounts he held on other competing exchanges, places like Poloniex, Kraken, Bitfinex.
Okay, and this is the part that I find so psychologically interesting. He wasn't just stealing it to buy yachts and private jets, though he certainly did that too. He was gambling with it.
He was a degenerate trader, an addict. The OSC's forensic analysis was incredible. They tracked the flow of funds and found that he was taking these hundreds of millions of dollars of stolen customer crypto and making massive, high-risk, leveraged trades on other platforms.
He was betting on the price of other coins.
He was mostly making huge bets that the price of Bitcoin would go up. He was going along with leverage. But you have to remember the timeline. This was happening through 2017 and, crucially, 2018.
When the price was crashing.
When the price was in a free fall. So he's betting big on black, and the roulette wheel is coming up red over and over and over again.
And like any gambler in a hole, he just digs deeper.
He doubles down. It's the classic gambler's fallacy. My luck has to turn. I just need one big win to make it all back. So he would steal more customer funds to make even bigger, more desperate bets. And he lost it all. The OSC calculated his trading losses alone were over $100 million.
So he didn't hide the money. He incinerated it. He was just a bad trader playing with house money, except the house was his customers' life savings.
He was both an embezzler and a terrible trader. He siphoned off millions to fund his lavish lifestyle, the properties, the travel, the plane. But the vast bulk of the money was just vaporized in bad market bets.
Which finally explains everything. It explains why the wallets were empty. It explains why he had to operate it as a Ponzi scheme. He needed new customer deposits to pay out withdrawal requests because the original funds were already gone.
And by December 2018, the hole was just too deep. The math no longer worked. There was no way out. He was completely trapped.
This reality, the sort of denial tragedy of a gambling addiction, it's almost a letdown for the people who wanted a grand conspiracy, which of course brings us to the conspiracy theories.
Oh yes, the exit scam.
Because so many people simply refuse to believe he just died of Crohn's disease.
And you can understand why. On the surface, the story is compelling. You have a cornered fraudster facing decades in prison. You have a death in a foreign country where, theoretically, a fraudulent death certificate isn't impossible to obtain. You have a closed casket funeral.
And a body that was embalmed and repatriated with incredible speed. It all just feels a little too convenient.
It was so suspicious that in December of 2019, the law firm that was representing the victims sent a formal request to the RCMP, Canada's federal police force. They asked for his body to be exhumed.
They wanted to dig him up and do a DNA test.
Yes. They cited the questionable circumstances surrounding the death and the need to definitively confirm his identity and cause of death.
And did the RCMP ever do it?
No, they didn't. They reviewed the file and eventually stated that they didn't find sufficient evidence of foul play to warrant an exhumation. But that refusal, of course, just added more fuel to the conspiracy fire.
To this day, there are entire online communities dedicated to the idea that Gerald Cotten is alive and well, sipping a drink on a beach somewhere under a new name.
And there have been documentaries and podcasts like Exit Scam and Netflix's Trust No One that have really explored that theory in depth.
I have to ask you, just based on all the evidence, what's your take? Is he alive?
You know, I think it's tempting to believe the more exciting story, but looking at the facts, Crohn's complications are very real. Septic shock can kill a healthy young person incredibly quickly. And on a psychological level, this is a guy who lived his entire life online. He was addicted to the game, to the trading, to the deception. Is it really plausible that a person like that could just unplug forever? Yeah. Never log in again, never make another trade? It seems unlikely to me.
And there's the other point, right? If you were going to fake your death and run, why would you leave the wallets empty? Wouldn't you have $100 million stashed away in Monero somewhere first?
Exactly. If it was a planned exit scam, it was the worst planned exit scam in history. He left his wife behind to face the fallout with essentially no hidden assets to draw on. That speaks more to a desperate sudden end rather than a meticulous master plan.
Speaking of his wife, let's move to the aftermath. Part 6, the human cost of all this. Jennifer Robertson.
She has always maintained that she knew nothing about the fraud. Her story is that she genuinely believed Jerry was this brilliant, hardworking CEO, and she was just the supportive partner. She even wrote a book about it called Bitcoin Widow.
In it, she paints herself as just another one of his victims.
But the courts didn't entirely see it that way. The money she was living on, the houses, the plane, the travel, it was all proceeds of crime.
So she had to give it back.
She did. As part of a settlement with the bankruptcy trustee, she agreed to forfeit about $12 million worth of assets. Pretty much everything was clawed back to go into the pot for the victims. She was allowed to keep some personal items, her retirement savings, and about $90,000 in cash, but the life of luxury was over.
And what about the actual victims, the 115,000 people who lost everything?
It has been a long, slow, painful grind through the bankruptcy courts. These things take years. It wasn't until 2023, more than 4 years after the collapse, that the trustee was able to make the first interim payout to creditors.
And the number is just heartbreaking. How much did they get back?
About 13 cents on the dollar.
13 cents. So if you had $100,000, your life savings, your retirement in Quadriga, you got back $13,000. 4 years later.
And that's just the financial loss. You can't put a number on the stress, the sleepless nights, the retirement's ruined, the family's put under strain. The human cost is immeasurable.
It really brings us back to the central crushing irony of this whole affair. Bitcoin was invented to create a trustless financial system. The whole idea was don't trust the bankers, trust the math.
And yet, Quadriga collapsed because of a massive, old-fashioned failure of trust.
It exposes what you could call the centralization paradox of crypto. The currency itself is decentralized, but for most people to actually buy it and sell it, they flock to these centralized exchanges.
They ended up swapping the big, regulated, insured banks for a guy named Jerry with an encrypted laptop and zero oversight.
We traded regulated institutions for unregulated individuals. And it turns out individuals can be much more easily corrupted.
Or they can just die. And this event, this disaster, it was a brutal wake-up call for Canadian regulators. The OSC, the government, they realized they couldn't just pretend crypto didn't exist anymore.
So Quadriga's collapse basically forced the industry in Canada to professionalize.
In a painful way, yes. Now, to operate a crypto exchange in Canada, you have to register with the regulators, you have to have third-party custody of assets, you have to prove you have reserves, you can't trade against your own customers. It was the Titanic of Canadian crypto, the spectacular disaster that forced everyone to start building lifeboats.
So as we wrap this up, I want to leave our listeners with one final provocative thought to chew on. We've talked about the what if he didn't die question.
A great counterfactual.
We know the wallets were empty by April 2018. He died in December. For 8 long months, he was running on fumes, just juggling deposits and withdrawals, robbing Peter to pay Paul.
The Ponzi was mathematically at its end. The music had stopped even if no one on the outside could hear the silence yet.
So here's the question. Was Gerald Cotten's death the cause of the collapse? Or was it just the event that finally revealed a collapse that was already complete? If he hadn't gotten on that plane to India, what would the next week, the next month have looked like for him?
He would have landed back in Canada and walked straight into an inferno. The lawsuits, the frozen accounts, the OSC investigation was already closing in. The collapse was 100% inevitable.
So his death, whether it was a faked exit or a tragic medical event or something in between, it wasn't the iceberg that sank the ship.
No. The ship was already at the bottom of the ocean. His death was just the flare that finally lit up the wreckage for everyone to see.
A sobering thought. And maybe the ultimate lesson from all this is that even in a world of trustless technology, you still have to decide who to trust. And if the answer is just one guy with a laptop, you might want to reconsider.
Trust, but verify. And maybe, just maybe, don't give your money to a guy whose teenage nickname was Scepter.
Good advice. That's our deep dive on the rise and fall of QuadrigaCX. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.